All right, I think we're ready to start.
Good.
I hereby call to order this meeting of the Security Housing Finance Corporation of Travis County. Let's begin by taking the roll call.
President Julio Gonzalez Altamirano,
Present.
Vice President Lisa Reams, Director Keisha Prince, Director Wilmer Roberts, Director Jan Wenig, Director Rebecca Weber, Director Delee Becker.
Ms. Becker, does that how you say your first name?
Yes, it's like delete without the T.
All right. We have a quorum.
Yes, sir.
As our first item of business, we are going to administer the Strategic Housing Finance Board Director's oath of office to our confirmed absentee.
I'll allow you to do the honors.
Okay. We do them jointly, yes? Do we do them
Yes.
jointly? Yes, so Ms. Becker and Ms. Roberts, will you join me?
You should. Oh, wow. I'll take it.
I have one. Your second time doing this.
Yeah.
Any pointers on how we make it best?
It's a longer.
Okay, not every word, long as it's. All right,
That's fine.
And we're gonna repeat it the same.
yes. So of course,
Okay, sure. I'm gonna read this, correct? He's gonna read it. Okay.
so I will say, I will read it and you will repeat it
Okay,
and then you will be sworn in.
okay.
I
I, Rebecca Weber. I, Delee Becker.
do solemnly swear
Solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the duties
that I will faithfully execute the duties
of the office of Director of the Strategic Housing Finance Corporation of Travis County
of the office of Director of the Strategic Housing Finance Corporation of Travis County
and will to the best of my ability preserve and protect and defend
and will to the best of my ability preserve and protect and defend
the Constitution and laws of the United States and of this state.
the Constitution and laws of the United States and of this state.
And I solemnly swear that I have not directly or indirectly
And I solemnly swear that I have not directly or indirectly
paid, offered, or promised to pay, contributed, or promised to contribute any money or valuable thing, or promised any public office or employment
paid, offered, or promised to pay, contributed, or promised to contribute, and money or valuable thing, or promised any public office of employment
as a reward to secure appointment.
as a reward to secure appointments.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations, Ms. Weber. Congratulations, Ms. Becker. We are going to do good things together. Thank
Yes.
you.
all right.
Congratulations.
Let us now move to item 3, public forum citizen communication. Ms. Hoffman, does anyone sign up to communicate with us today?
Yes, Mr. President, we have Ashley Zapata.
Okay, Ms. Zapata. Are you ready? Is she here? Are they here?
Yes, you come up to the front table, Ms. Zapata.
Hi, Ms. Zapata.
Good morning. Well, good morning. My name is Ashley Zapata. I'm a member of the neighborhood of Rowan Heights. I'm a mother of 5, so 6 twins in there. Now, we've been at Rosemont since 2019. My family was not given the option to leave during the renovation. After they took out our walls and ceiling, it took them 7 months to come back and put it up. For all those months, the insulation came out of the walls protecting the hill. My 6-year-old daughter has acute asthma. Ever since they've taken the walls out, she had to go to the hospital every week. Even 1 month, she ended up getting pneumonia. I had to ask for a reasonable accommodation for her, but they would not move. Patrick Howard and Rosemont Management made lots of excuses why it was taking so long. A few months ago, me and my babies were moved to another unit. It was not because of the reasonable accommodation. It was because our building was condemned by the code department for an unstable foundation that was too dangerous. The conditions in the new unit were also not good. They moved us into an apartment that had. I had no choice but to accept the unit because the other one was so bad. And it was making my daughter sick. It was also taking a toll on my own mental health. There were days when I felt so hopeless and depressed about our living conditions that I no longer wanted to live. SHFC may not be the owner anymore, but the harm is done. There needs to be consequences, and if Patrick Howard and his staff do not have the skills to run housing agency, they should not have this solution. I would like the board to remember what tenants have come here every month to testify about, and to consider this during Mr. Howard's evaluation. Rosemont tenants also think that it is important to conduct an investigation to prevent this from ever happening again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Yes,
Yes, ma'am. I signed the lease November 21st, 2020. And during 2023, you've been experiencing anything? Yes, ma'am. Or do you want to say more about the conditions in 2023? During the women's store, I know we didn't have power, but even then we could. Like, just like. And I also wanted to add, like, I would speak to Mr. Howard about the living condition, reasonable accommodation and moving. And like I said, I got a lot of excuses, but he often asks me if I receive Section 8. No, I don't. I pay my budget. Can you repeat your first name? Ashley. Ashley. Yeah.
We have Teresa Rodriguez. Is it Teresa Rodriguez online? And then the next is Gabby Garcia.
Garcia. Freeman.
Okay. Good morning, my name is Gabby Garcia. I'm an organizer with Rosemont and I work with the neighbors at Rosemont Tenants Association. The Tenants Association has made it a priority to ensure that SHFC is reformed, and that the CEO, Patrick Howard, is held accountable. Under his watch, Rosemont was not properly maintained and repaired both before and after Winter Storm Uri. He and the previous board, including Mona Roberts, attempted to evict 87 families, claiming that their homes were uninhabitable. After which fact, only half of the tenants had to relocate and the other half was mysteriously told that suddenly their homes were safe to live in. Relocation efforts were bungled, tenants were bounced around, families were moved 6 times in 8 months. Construction crews were not managed, which led to the loss of millions of dollars in shoddy work. The fact that the apartments weren't fixed correctly didn't stop Mr. Howard and SHFC from moving tenants back in. Tenants were bullied into accepting apartments that weren't ready. They were gaslit about the mold that was never removed. And Patrick and members of that board disrespected and dismissed tenants who came forward with these issues. SHFC also failed to fix the homes where tenants were allowed to stay, and many families went 2 years without drywall, ceilings, and floors. Under his leadership, simple code violations were ignored, which led to fines, which led to the suspension of the property license to rent. And because those violations were not corrected, the bank was ready to foreclose. A sale date which could have been avoided if they had shared the notices of foreclosure and worked with FOSTA and tenants and code to fix the problem. And finally, during the sale, Patrick and his team did not negotiate on tenant's behalf, even though the seller was willing to accept tenant demands. I could go on and on, but the point is that at every step, the CEO of SHFC and Patton has not only failed to perform, but has put the lives of families at Rosemont in danger. The harm that has been caused to tenants is irreparable and completely unacceptable. After all of this, it's unfathomable that there have been no consequences and that Patrick was given a raise last year. During today's evaluation of Patrick's performance, I urge you to keep in mind what has happened over the last 2 years. We also encourage you to use some of the proceeds from the sale to conduct an independent investigation about what happened at Rosemont. We can't turn back time and change what tenants went through, but such an investigation can ensure that it doesn't happen again. Until these issues are addressed, Patrick and his staff will continue to have influence on the lives of low-income tenants in Travis County. Even today at City Council, other messes created by HATC are being looked at with alarm. PFCs that, not surprisingly, were not properly vetted and are being rushed through. One developer even indicated that HATC staff failed to mention that city approval was still lacking, jeopardizing the project. And the city is now having to step in to ensure that there are proper levels of affordability and terms of tenant protections in these fields. We ask that you work with HATC, with DCFC boards to make sure that all of the entities run by HATC are reformed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Christie. So let's move.
That is all who are signed up.
Okay.
Question, what is a PFC?
The Housing Authority has an affiliate, it's a Public Facilities Corporation called Travis County Facilities Corporation.
Down the back.
Yeah, so that comes on the top for, you will be very well acquainted with the PFC structurally. Very soon. Now we're going to move to item number 4, the consent agenda. I move for unanimous consent, the approval of the minutes from April 6, 2023 regular meeting. Can I get a second, please? Any opposed?
That's really
I note the approval of the minutes. You abstain? Okay, can we do unanimous consent with an abstention?
yes.
Yes, okay. Any other abstention? Item B, approval of the minutes from the May 4th, 2023 regular meeting. Can we get a second for approval? Ms. Prince is the second. And there's one abstention. The items are approved. Discussion items. Item A, strategic reset. Before we move to this item, I wanted to just provide a brief overview of what this discussion is about. As we all should know and know, since someone went through it, last spring, the boards of HATC and SHFC abandoned the traditional pattern of being the same group of people. We also became, in my vintage, very focused on what to do about Rosemont. Now that we have sold Rosemont and we have time to decide what we're going to do, we are starting a conversation, especially now that we have full board complement about our future. We should have received a memo that outlined some of the challenges for us as an entity in the ecology of the county for affordable housing production, as well as some preliminary but not completely exhaustive options of what to do intended for discussion. They're not proposals per se as much as here are some flavors, so you have a sense of what vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry might be like, even if we end up ordering pistachio. With that said, I have requested that Mr. Howard provide some basic information so that we can, over the next 3 meetings, come to a decision about what exactly we want to be about in terms of serving our mission. It is incredibly fortunate that we have our new board members as we begin this discussion. Specifically in terms of the topics that I wanted to cover is to begin to get a sense of our powers, where we fit in the organizational chart, our finances in the short term, the next 3 years, as well as the typical deals. Finally, our responsibilities and obligations, which sometimes are hard to understand, but they are from to HATC, which is historically in recent history been our partner. We have been in some ways a tool under tool. With that, Mr. Howard, I leave it to you, you can guide us through the material and the best way you see it.
Okay. Thank you. So as it relates to the organizational structure, at the very top are the citizens of Travis County in which we serve. You all as a board are appointed by the Travis County Commissioners Court and authorized as far as the Housing Finance Corporation under the guise of Chapter 394 of the Texas Local Government Code. And I see it a little squinting, so it might be a little bit hard to read. We're gonna try to blow that up just a little.
I think it's just pixel.
So, okay, so again, you're governed under the Texas Local Government Code in terms of how you're established. So so as it relates to the third column, the third row where you talk about organizations, you have the Housing Authority, and then you have Strategic Housing and Finance Corporation. They are a joint, they have a symbiotic relationship, and that is codified through an interlocal agreement, which you have a copy of. That interlocal agreement outlines what the services that are rendered by the Housing Authority to Strategic in lieu of financial support that's provided to the Housing Authority to maintain its operations. And that's what it says, shared resources and services. Another entity like is the Travis County Housing Finance Corporation, also appointed by the Travis County Commissioners Court, as is the Housing Authority and Strategic Housing Finance Corporation, with a very similar mission as SHFC, but the Commissioners Court actually serve as a board of directors for that organization. But for all intents and purposes, you have the same mission, you have the same area of jurisdiction in terms of Travis County and serving the residents of Travis County that qualify. So under strategic, you have multiple limited partnerships, and prior to and subsequent to Rosemont, you have a limited interest in those partnerships of 0.01%. And I always compare that to owning shares in Apple. No one's asking me to make decisions about Apple, but I might own stock in the company. So you have limited partnerships. The primary goal in those cases is to render a tax exemption for the ad valorem and the sales tax. You also can issue bonds. TCFC has the same authority in addition to the housing authority. Next slide, please. So again, just a little bit more about the relationship, and that's also hard to read, between the housing authority and strategic, but essentially it just outlines some of the general responsibilities of contained within the interlocal agreement, essentially shared services, staff, and the like. And in the memo that follows this, or the write-up, we talk about the percentage of staff and their allocation of time. But for what it's worth, I think it's in the subsequent page, but for what it's worth, essentially the housing authority provides administrative support to strategic and again in lieu of some financial support. So this a summary, and you also, I know the president sent you out the entirety of chapter 394, but just in essence, chapter 394 really provides the Housing Finance Corporation the ability to essentially affect the affordable housing space through the acquisition, refinancing, improvement of housing for the purposes of serving low-income persons. And that's what that says in a nutshell. We can go to the next slide, actually. Sorry, go up and go back. No, sorry. I just wanted to see the title of the page. Interlocal agreement, okay. So the interlocal agreement, as I talked about it, we talked about the responsibilities of the staff, but what this speaks to is how you actually came into being. In 2004, the Commissioners Court saw the need to have a lease purchase program and decided that they wanted to use the vehicle of a housing finance corporation to do such. You acquired 170 properties, of which you leased and sold those to those individuals. When I got here in 2015, we had 4 properties left. And those were actually disposed of to those individuals occupying those units. So needless to say, the program did not continue. I think it had mixed success, quite frankly. But in 2006, you as an organization, Strategic Housing Finance Corporation, began to do tax credit projects, primarily the 4%. You go to next page.
Mr. Howard.
Yes, sir.
Tell us the difference. I sent a document to try and break down the, as you know, immense jargon around the low income housing tax credit program.
Sure, I can
It's administration, if you could
try.
summarize for folks.
Sure, yeah. Okay,
And
so,
the 4% versus 9%.
yeah,
This sort of, how much agency, how much control we as our entity with the financial powers have to get tax.
Yeah,
credits.
yeah.
I think this can be a little
okay.
confusing.
Okay, I'm gonna try to be succinct and, our attorney might help me too, but for all intents and purposes, during the Reagan administration, the president saw an inherent need to, support workforce housing, to create the low income housing tax credit program. And essentially, based on the state population, you were given an allocation of tax credits. The idea was that through a competitive process, these would be distributed, and whereby those credits could be syndicated or sold for the purposes of building affordable housing, in which there would be obviously income restrictions applied to those. So we as Strategic Housing Finance Corporation, I think since 2006, have participated in that program. We are not the ones receiving the allocation of the credits. It's typically through a partnership, and I'll just call it a public-private partnership, since we're a public entity with a development partner who we are, being 100% tax exempt, are able to extend a tax exemption to them in order to make the project work. Right. So essentially, you're not paying any sales tax, which is huge, not paying any real estate taxes, for the period of the tax credit affordability period, which is 30 years. And then there's our income tiering that may be at the max is 60% area median income, or at least an average. And then you may have lower tiers of income included within that. That's called the land use restriction agreement, and that governs, who actually could live in those units. So in most cases, we are the general partner, which means our interest is less than 1% or less as relates to the project. And then the limited partner will be the primary managing partner, which will have 99% or more of the ownership interest. So for all intents and purposes, they're the ones that make all the decisions. So our decision making is limited, and that's why I liken it to owning stock in an organization, because you have that much leverage and authority over essentially what happens. Obviously, you have the ability, because you're extending the tax exemption. So for all intents and purposes, if there was an issue related to your feeling that you no longer wanted to be a part of this relationship, they would essentially need to replace you with someone else in order to continue the benefit of having the tax exemption. So I guess you have some ability to say, we don't like what's going on. We could decide we no longer want to be a part of this. There are nuances to that are more financial, legal in nature in terms of how that actually exiting may happen. But for all intents and purposes, decision making on a daily basis is not your purview. In fact, very limited. But did you want to say anything else about that, or you want?
I think that's pretty accurate. We are the general partner
Yes.
for the former subsidiary LLC.
That's correct.
To be the general partner, and so we have the general partner rights and responsibilities. However, usually the developer has a special limited partner interest that they kind of oversight for that, and then they mentioned the tax credit. Limited partner, which generally owns 99.9% of the partnership, that overarching rights in the partnership agreement to protect. They've made a huge investment providing tax credit equity, so those rights are all to protect their investment and the tax effect of that investment. But but I think,
Okay,
um,
basically what Cliff said.
4% versus 9%.
Right. Could you talk about 4% versus 9%?
Sure. 9% tax credits, as we say.
Mr. Mark, if you could just,
I'm sorry. Yes, I spoke one, I'm saying how, and council to the, to strategic, since it was formed back in 2004. I've been around the block a few times on these deals. The 9% program, so I guess to back up, a project will have an eligible basis, which will include construction costs, and there's all kinds of rules about what can be considered eligible basis. And so the 9% tax credits, 9% of that eligible basis is given out in tax credits, and then the 4% program, 4% of the eligible basis. So that's just as sort of a 4 and 9% come in. So the tax credit investor is allocated the tax credits, and the tax credits are calculated as a percentage of the eligible basis. And so it's really fairly simple. The difference in programs is the 9% is very competitive. Developers will apply to THCA, and there's a full ranking schedule every year, and the rules change slightly, sometimes more than slightly every year. But the developers will apply for those tax credits in 9%, and then some will be awarded, and that's usually in July, so it's kind of the next year awards here soon. The 4% are a matter of right if the development gets an allocation of tax-exempt bonds from the Texas Bond Review Board, which is also another application process, and it's not guaranteed. Some years there's not a lot of applications, there's not so many applications, and most deals get an allocation of the state's volume cap, called the state volume cap, in order to issue 4% bonds. And once 4% bonds are issued, once taxes and bonds are issued, 4% tax credits are generally a matter of right. There's a few procedural steps you've got to take to the SCA, but they're fairly easy, and it's not competitive. If you meet the standards, you'll get the credits. And then you have there's all kinds of rules about when you can close on those tax-exempt bonds and how that works. That's trying to be overviewed without getting too much in the weeds. I'll go ahead with.
I thought that was a great summary. Anybody have any questions about 4% versus 9% and the application right now?
Right, so each year, I just want to say that each year, I'm gonna wait because I'm just really has a burning question.
You want to say your question?
Okay, so I was gonna say each year there's a qualified allocation plan that essentially directs kind of the focus of where the tax credits may be applied. So there may be inherently a need to say, well, in urban area or rural areas, we want to ensure that the majority of the tax credit projects get allocated, and this is for the 9% primarily, in certain areas or for a certain subgroup, you know what I mean, that may be overlooked. And so every state has what they call a qualified allocation plan, and that essentially outlines what the priorities for that year may be in terms of, one, what's available in terms of the number of tax credits, and then two, what the priority may be in terms of it. So areas that are popular may have more competition as it relates to tax credit, where tax credits were in other areas that may not be, depending on what the need is. So each year you will look at the qualified allocation plan to determine if what your proposed project may fit within the guides of that, or how likely you will be in order to provide, to be successful in doing such. So again, as it relates to our organization, we've only really done the 4% tax credits because obviously they're not worth as much, because you only can cover 4% of what he says, the eligible basis in terms of the cost, right? So there is a need for infusion of some funds, which would be made up through the not paying the tax, paying the sales tax and the ad valorem tax. So in almost every case, an entity seeking out 4% tax credits will find an entity like ourselves, or Travis County HFC, or the City of Austin's Housing Authority, or the City of Austin's Housing Finance Corporation, which two I didn't mention, but obviously they're city, but they also have the same ability to extend this 100% tax exemption. A nonprofit organization typically has a 50% tax exemption, and they also typically participate in some of these projects, maybe in a 9%, because maybe the gap for the deal is maybe not as great. So,
Just one of your questions.
Yeah, I was a UT professor who said, the answer to like trying to understand broad and abstract regulations and pattern is to apply them to your current situation. So I was just gonna ask you in this 4%, 10% breakdown, do we even have any property at 9%? Because I was not aware of them.
No.
Okay. And so that just helps us sort of wrap our minds
Which one?
around what to pay attention to and what's the current transactions that we're.
Sure, I believe Cambridge is in that, Cambridge.
Oh, okay. Yes.
That's the only one I'm aware of.
yes, it's a senior building in the city of Pflugerville. I will tell you in current history, there's probably the qualified allocation plan dictates those. I would say in this current environment, you would not likely see a 9% project.
And where's Cambridge at in the
It's in
number of years of tax exemption on that?
What year was Cambridge built? 2011? 2011.
So where are we at? How many are left?
Sorry.
Started in 2006.
Is that all?
It was early in 2011.
It was earlier than, okay. We
Started in 2006 and it took about 24
Placed in service.
months
Yeah,
to get through construction and move forward from that, which is not unusual at all. And it has been a high performing asset ever since then.
so about 2008, I think,
Well,
what they call it, place of service.
Give the director the answer. Do
We
you
will
want-
get
Yeah.
the answer
Do we have
for
an additional
Cambridge.
question?
No, I want to track that time period. So when that process completes, often properties don't for sale, is that right?
After the 30-year affordability period, correct, in some cases, depending on what the terms of the arrangement may be, there may be a right of first refusal,
That's right.
which may allow us to purchase a property in some cases. But yes, there is.
So just if we could circle back to that.
Sure,
just-
sure,
Thank you.
yeah. uh-huh.
All right. Mr. Howard, you want to continue?
That's your
Oh,
question.
Mr. Howard, yes.
So the qualified
Allocation
something
plan.
allocations plan.
I sent this
Is that-
to you. It's a 200-page document.
On it.
Yeah. It's not okay.
Is that an administrative rulemaking process? How does that come to be, I guess?
Early, the governor's office.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
the SBA has to follow.
Every winter, I believe, TDC basically, I'm sure there's some engagement.
Yeah, they solicit comments through, for a period, they'll have public hearings on the project, on the qualified allocation plan. We'll ask entities like ourselves, TAP, Texas affiliate of affordable housing providers, TALFA, Texas Association of Local Housing Finance Agencies, and others to weigh in on the terms of the plan, and then it'll get approved. And then it goes into effect for that year.
And did I understand correctly that we don't have any projects that meet the 15%? That was talked about for nonprofit?
Well, what I was saying that a nonprofit, like say a Guadalupe Neighborhood Association, may participate in tax credit program, but of course, it's more beneficial for someone to participate with someone that has 100% tax exemption. But they do participate similar to us. And that's why I wasn't listing them as one of the major players that, in terms of peers, because they only have a 50% tax exemption allowed, in terms of participation.
We, maybe the question she's asking is, do we have nonprofits in our portfolio that we've given the
Yes.
4%?
Yes.
No, a nonprofit, you mean no.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
And we have shared the list repeatedly as a board, so you can obviously see it together. You can see kind of who we
Correct. Usually it's a
LPs
private
are-
entity that will come to us, or a nonprofit is what I'm saying. as
It's a limited
relates to the tax credit.
If I'm anticipating. Any additional questions before Mr. Howard reviews his presentation?
Okay, trying to figure out where I am. Okay,
We're on the second page of the
Interlocal
interlocal
agreement.
agreement.
yeah, so essentially, I mean, I think the page talks about the split at a time. Right, yeah, right here. So there's 8 staff members, housing authority staff members that work on behalf of the Strategic Housing Finance Corporation through a time allocation framework. I actually have an employment agreement, so those things are outlined in there as well. So each year, we're asked to provide those services, and then we approve a budget. You approve an annual budget each year, the housing authority and strategic does as well, which talks about the amount of funding and then it's working down. But it's the current scenario looks like this, whereas 30% of my salary comes from strategic, it's covered by strategic, finance director also 30%, and then HR 15, asset manager 50. We have a senior administrative assistant 50, the finance specialist 10, and executive assistant 10, and then another administrative specialist 10.
This is so important, and Mr. Roberts has repeatedly educated us about this. Your employment agreement is with HAP,
That's correct.
and we have an interlocal agreement to get capacity.
That's correct.
Several of you are on the HAP board, and we can also press to you. But for those of us on SHFC, this is part of our history, but it is also our current reality. In terms of how we operate, it doesn't have to be, could be, that is sort of what we're having a discussion about, which is a nice segue to termination agreement. In the
Yes.
event,
Sure, we can blow that up just a little. Okay.
Sorry.
So, I mean, so as far as the termination, I mean, it talks about how you are able, the ability to terminate the agreement. It says fail to meet a material item or condition, and I imagine that probably could be debated, but within 10 days, and actually so some notification as such, for that to happen. But essentially, yes, if their sides agree that there is a failure to meet the obligations, then you could say, I don't want to do this anymore, I guess, and we go through our legal means. And there's some other things outlined in the specific agreement as he quit looking at me, so you might want to say something. Oh, he might.
No, I think you're right. I think both parties can just decide that they, have to.
That is correct.
Well, strategic and the housing authority said they don't want to do this anymore. Agree to terminate. That's all I was thinking.
Yes, no, that's perfect. Okay. Thank you.
any questions about that? And I just want to reiterate, I'm showing you the controls in the cockpit. I'm not saying press any button in particular. I think it's so that you know what you're piloting and where the buttons are and where the rudder is and where the controls are. It is not to say do this, do that, press this, pull the ejector. It's just so that you know where things are as we figure out what we want to do. If you want to continue with your vote.
Sure. Let's see, city liability. Okay, that's really it for that portion. I think the next thing that I was, okay, so what I did is, I thought this was interesting. So I got transcripts from 2004. That actually has dialogue that the commissioners, dialogue from the commissioners meeting that essentially said what they thought about creating strategic, why they created it, that sort of thing, because there was always questions about how this all came about, why are they together, that sort of thing. But I got this committed directly from the commissioners board, I guess minutes or transcript. But it basically shares the conversation about creating this entity called Strategic Housing Finance Corporation, specifically for the purposes of doing a lease purchase program. And I think what I will say is that at some point, one person in charge elected to do the projects, all of the 4% tax credit projects, with the exception of the 19%, under the guise of strategic, because strategic was providing financial support. But for all intents and purposes, the powers of the housing authority and strategic were the same. So as you know, HACA does not have a housing finance corporation that provides it financial support. It does its tax credit projects under its own affiliate and not a separate entity. So, but this is the conversation. It was primarily about lease purchase. And that, as I talked about earlier, is what essentially happened there. The thought was that the same board was kind of oversee both with the guy, the thought of them working together. But I think it's good context in terms of sort of how you got here.
Mr. Roberts, one of the things as the dean of our body that I believe I absorbed with the time that I've been here is that in the recent past, SHFC functioned as a development arm of HATC to provide subsidization to its own housing affordability initiatives. Am I getting it roughly right? Would you add some additional context for us in terms of how we ended up with what we are in our portfolio and our powers that hasn't been covered today so far?
I will try to answer them. If you can chime in if you want to. Basically, when I came on the board, there was an agreement with strategic because of the housing authority only received about 79.5% of funding from the federal government, and that's basically a 20% shortage of income. So over the years, strategic was used as an arm to help fund the housing authority for that subsidy that the housing authority didn't have. And it transformed itself probably 2-3 years ago to where there was arms created in the strategic in the housing authority to facilitate cooperation as well as the public finance corporation was created to help do similar deals such as PFC for public finance corporations and etc. And strategic's role was being decreased in a sense because over the last 3 years, I think there's been 1 or 2 4% tax deals coming in over the last minimum of 3 years. It may have been more. And so there was not enough. There was always a tug of war. Do we fund strategic or do we need to do this? And so several board members suggested buying of Rosemont, which was, as you know, a catastrophic event for us. That in the process of it, that's the purpose of it. But did I answer your question?
I think you did a great job explaining how we got here.
You want to add anything to it?
No, I think that's right. I think the one thing I'll add is, we're still analyzing it, I think it's probably more for the future with PFC, that it's been harder to do, because of the legislation.
Yeah, the legislation.
Very recently. So I think that we will either slow down before the housing transaction as a whole, or hopefully some of those transactions will do it on PFC before to be restructured. We brought to housing finance. But I think there will be some, because of legislation, I think there will be some shift. Some of the projects. But I think the history is.
Anything additional in your presentation, Mr. Howard, before we get to financial?
I think I will always add that when I came, prior to me coming here, there was a little bit of a controversy related to the housing authority and strategic. I think that there was a little bit of a disconnect in terms of how things have been operating at the housing authority. And so there was an effort afoot to sort of sever the ties at that point between the housing authority and the strategic. But in the end, they decided not to separate. And this is in 2014-15. And I think it was primarily because there was a feeling that the housing authority was putting a drain on the strategic's resources. And of course, that sort of turned around, but there was some thought, to separate the two. bunch of board members, resigned from the board. And then when I got here, I think it was only 3 people on the housing authority and 4 on strategic. And then at that point, the previous county judge did elect to vacate the board members and make them the same to try to pull the entities together to work more collaboratively. And so that's what happened in 2016. But that's all I have in terms of covering items of the files.
Okay. Would it be possible to discuss financial projections? I know it was a public sign.
Yeah, so, okay, so we were having some challenges with the financial projections, but we will pull up.
That's on page 42. And that is still a work in progress. Fortunately, I've not been able to get some numbers from some of the partnerships. I did find the information for Wild Horse, the first 2. They are still in construction, Wild Horse Flats and Jaeger Flats. They are still under construction, and in 2024, they are supposed to stabilize. And once they stabilize, the investor would release the developer fee, and you would get a cut of the developer fee, and that is projected for 2024, sometime in 2024. And it is expected for both properties, it's expected you would get about at least $1.2 million each. So that information is not there, but I would need to update that. That is for 2024. And so that would bring the number, the total number at the bottom, closer to, I think I have 1.3, so you can add another 2.4 to that. 3.4, about 3.7, at least 3.7 for 2024. Rise Residential, they have a couple of properties. We are supposed to get developer fee in 2023 this year, and it's still pending. And we have a meeting kind of set up to discuss it with them. So that whole Rise Residential, the whole group of properties, it's I don't have information for that right now, but the ones that are completed, there's 8609 or their tax credit, final tax credit application with TDHCA still hasn't been approved. That's the last configuration we have with them. So the investors haven't released the money. Some point in this month, we will be discussing that with them. What when we get those funds. No,
No, we still have to go through, and work through, working couple of agreements.
Yeah, I mean, it was a difficult task. I mean, after we put that out, I mean, they typically go from year to year, but I'll be honest with you, in most cases, other than once a project is completed, in most cases, we're receiving what we call residual income, which typically means, cash surplus and the like. Most of the funding that we receive typically is at the consummation of the deal and once the construction is complete. So that being the case, obviously not having, I'm going to say 1.5 projects right now that potentially haven't really started yet. Most of the projects that we're talking about are either under construction or have been constructed for some time, and we're receiving those proceeds. And as Super did allude to, Rise Construction, which has probably been our primary partner, is probably the one we have the most difficult time of getting information from, related to where we are in this process or where they are in terms of the funding. But that's probably a product of having not much leverage over what happens and relates to development. But obviously the funds ultimately will be there, we'll have a better indication of sort of where we are in terms of projects, but most of these projects predate, 2021 in terms of things that we've done actually, in terms of new business.
The takeaway here that I wanted us to all kind of collectively get to is, our revenue depends on development pots, deals being constantly increasing. We do have some revenue that allows us to basically cover our underlying burn rate. You saw the budget that I sent you, or that we adopted, depending on how you want to slice it and dice it. This is just the president talking, but we have between 700K to 1 million of expenses. There are our obligations to the interlocal, basic capacity, some other things. We are not right now cross-subsidizing HATC, as those of you on HATC know, and heard that this morning. So we are in an interesting situation. An analogy that I have, have heard in the business sector is the sort of zombie, where you have enough to continue, but you are not truly alive. At the same time, one of the things we could also say is we have a significant market that we can go and play with, and we have a set of streams for the medium term that allow us to become entrepreneurial. So which storyline you want to pick ultimately depends on what your vision for the organization is. But the numbers that I sort of want to cement in our collective discussion is we have an underlying burn rate based on our interlocal and our needs. That's that number that I mentioned. We have, as best as we can tell, these projections have a floor of revenue. We have an asset balance. Go ahead.
Asset would be just be cash.
Yeah, and what is our cash balance roughly as of today?
It's about $4.5 million.
And as you all know, we have a conceptual bucket of an investment program for the proceeds of Rosemont. That is it's a conceptual bucket. It's not like there's a bag where the money is in there. It's a Rosemont only. But it's something that we committed to achieving. And so we will have to figure out how to include that.
I just want to say that not included in that is we have an outstanding balance of due outs of probably $500,000. The code violations, and we owe strategic claims, which was our consultant. First adjusted and consultant, and but that's about total. Keith and super about it. More than that with the violation.
Well, I got, I didn't get violation.
Yeah.
What we have with, strategic planning is around.
What about it in the violations like 300? So we owe about $500,000 still that we need to reconcile anyway.
Okay. So again, just big number, conceptual takeaway. We have an asset balance of cash. The cash is the asset of here. You heard the numbers. It's less than 4, probably more than 3. We have the revenue stream that is a best estimate as of today, but it gives you roughly the floor. I would not find it prudent to assume much higher than this floor. And we have our run rate that we kind of figure out from our budget based on our current expectations of the capacity that we need, which can change, but it is what we owe Patsy, so to speak, as long as we continue in the interlocal agreement. This is either a foundation for really interesting entrepreneurship, or it might be a situation where we cannot achieve an exit velocity and serve our mission at scale that is part of the discussion that we're having. This concludes all the information that I wanted to present at this first session in terms of considering our strategic reset. I would be really interested in going number by number and hearing if you have any questions or perspective that you want to share at this time. And then we will wrap up by talking about what are our next steps in making our decision about what we want to do that. And I will avoid calling upon.
I have a question.
Okay, Ms. Lemon.
So the bucket, I think we called it for Rosemont, is there a budget associated already with that set of things that we want to do?
So we passed a resolution that indicates kind of the process for what we will do with the net proceeds. We have not set a specific budget per se, but it is up to us to decide.
And what do we determine that?
The timing is in our control, so I would think we would do it as quickly as possible in a place, in a way that is complementary to the recent discussion.
Okay, so at our next meeting?
It could be at our next meeting, yes, absolutely. What we do with that bucket, although, again, the specifics of what we do with that bucket. They can be more. They might require more, discussion than we can have between now and then, but we can definitely, we're empowered to do so. It's essentially ours. That we're on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And us doing that work must happen before the tenants can get the benefits.
The way that we have proceeded is we provided what's the word that in the agreement, it's not just now,
we credited back a
We issued a
$3
credit
billion for relocation.
to provide the relocation in a way that was responsible to the buyers and the stakeholder request. So we have already allocated 3 million
Correct, for that purpose.
for the proceeds in alignment with the resolution of the fact. There's an additional amount, which I don't want to calculate on the day it's a precise number, but roughly equivalent to that size for some other priorities that we identified, but conceptual, that's specifically on $250 to like $1 million.
Yeah, I think those things spoke to the desire to look at how you may long-term affordability, maybe looking at how you keep the rents at a certain level, that sort of thing, but nothing related to specifically relocation activity, but the issue about the affordability was what typically was what was envisioned for how we decided to move forward as an organization. Mr. President, I just want to mention one other thing I'm included in the materials.
Yes.
So you had asked about what, and I think we all understand now, but Mr. Blunt did write up a memo that spoke to the difference in the structure as he verbally alluded to between our ownership interest in Rosemont versus other properties that we have in the portfolio. In addition, you had asked about reaching out to other housing finance corporations and their structure and their interest in potential ownership, their potential interest in the ownership interest in property that we may own, if that was something that you entertain in the future. And I have done that and provided some cursory material to those two entities.
I greatly enjoyed reading that memo. I found it very helpful. I thought the classification and categorization is what we all need to be familiar with. I strongly encourage you to read the memo. It is a little bit dense, and in the interest of time, we will not review it here unless someone really wants to. It is very important that there are certain suggestions about how difficult and transactionally expensive some potential direction might be in terms of disposition of assets. And I think we may engage those more as we take that more, take that more seriously. I strongly encourage you to, this is one of those board reports you really want to read. And this is one of those meetings where you really want to read everything that we put out. It is really important stuff. With that said, and with no other questions, I would like to go. Yes, Ms. Wynn?
On the bucket that Director Weber was talking about for the Rosemont, is for clarification purposes, between now and the next meeting, those discussions.
The real estate committee is who we charge with coming up with a proposal to us. And I did communicate with Ms. Reeves about talking at our update, saying to you all, well, why don't we goal that we're supposed to do into our strategic reset discussion, because we may need the proceeds for the strategic reset direction, to align it with what we want to do. That said, it's at the discretion of the committee, what they're gonna propose, and it's, the ultimate outcome is of the will of the body.
So are we looking forward to a proposal coming from the
It really, it depends on the,
direct.
yeah, I guess I would say I would like to hear kind of what people would write,
Okay.
because the real estate committee is really, the real estate committee in this situation is there to serve to do the front work of putting something like this together. We are not delegating the decision to them in this case. It's more, here are some ideas. And so we want to use the time in the committee to inform us in a way that does not become immediately obsolete if we're going in a specific direction in the broader reset. That said, I think a really good avenue would be, I will get together with the committee members on the real estate committee ASAP and put some suggestions on the message board, and that will give us a sense of, depending on the response of the message board, what we want to do better in terms of taking action. That might be an easiest way to provide some traction without using up too much energy in the direction that might be obsolete. Any other questions on strategic reset before we do the member by member check-in on it? Okay. All right. Mr. Roberts is the dean of the body. Any response to the material? Any outlook on where we should be going as an organization? All right, to be determined. All right. Any response to the material or outlook on our direction?
Are you responding to your memo separately or during this?
This would be a good time to respond to the memo.
Okay.
Yes.
So in terms of the potentially new directions or redefining ourselves, resetting ourselves, I am very interested in some of the thoughts that were put forward in the memo by the president, including developing a niche where we fill a need in the community that's not particularly well addressed at this time, including looking at housing, affordable housing for those leaving from our justice system or perhaps aging out of foster care, asylum seekers, disabled, the elderly, victims of domestic violence. Those are important categories that I'm not sure we currently serve particularly in a targeted way. Also very interested in the social housing models that are currently in existence in Canada, Seattle, Montgomery County, Maryland, also Vienna. If you look at the New York Times magazine last week, there's a big article on Vienna, and a number of housing authority directors traveled to Vienna to look at that kind of social. Their impressions are very interesting. I'm particularly interested in that one because of the permanence of the affordability, which is one of the things I'm extremely committed to, and the depth of the affordability where rents are capped at 30%, and also that all the revenues generated above costs of those developments are recycled back into building more development. So it's like a constantly refreshed stock of affordable housing in the communities that adopt that model. So I'm very interested in that one. And the fact that that would reach teachers, musicians, artists in our community, in addition to the elderly. And the fact that you stay there forever. It's a mixed use model where people are capped at 30% and then their incomes grow and then they have like more wealth. But the mixture of people in extreme or low poverty or extreme poverty and those who are well off makes for a very healthy community with lots of amenities. I'm very interested. And I think that's my impressions for now. There's a lot of ground to cover before we could get to these places, including in the social housing model. We need to find to start out. So looking at the balance sheet right now, I'm not sure. I see it under our current budget, but
Yeah. As a benchmark, Seattle started there with 700K.
that is true.
And so I don't mean that in any way, except that there's a point, data point for you.
I do know.
If my takeaway from there is niche is a good thing for you, and you talked a little bit about the two specific pathways in niche where we should spend some time maybe getting a little bit more information to make a decision as well as staff. Ms. Prince, any response to the material we covered today or outlook? That we want? If our new folks will go in alphabetical order. Any response? I know it's a lot of this. You want to be.
Not much. I do like the idea of the niche, but I would want to know, do we have projects on the ground in Public County that are servicing it?
And the my question that I'm hearing is, we wanted a niche that is replicable and obviously viable.
I don't know what, if there's already a niche that's servicing foster children, there might not be a need for more.
Mhm.
But I would want to know what niches have projects on the ground that are servicing those categories.
In some ways, the mental table you want to know is that here are the niches. But I don't know why I keep saying niche.
I
I
like
don't know
niche.
if these are the niches that we were looking at, these already have a player. We don't necessarily have marginal value to review. And some are, or alternately, we have a player and we talk to the player and the player says, so much market, please. So
Correct.
you want to know that like
Yeah,
any other immediate feedback. I know.
that's my immediate.
Okay, all right. Clever.
I like Mr. Shan, love the idea of being really good at serving some vulnerable group that needs housing. I just was Googling for the housing as we were talking, so I love that idea. I also am open to the reversion option. Or the asset transfer. So I guess that's it. Keep listening and learning.
Well, my sense of the, of where the body is at is we went a little bit about a few niche categories, including how you should pronounce it. As well as keep talking maybe about some of the other options. As the opportunity cost to going niche. Before we conclude the discussion about the future outlook, Mr. Howard. One of the things that's interesting over a potential niche direction is it's different from the somewhat opportunistic stance we've taken and that you have guided us with. What is your reaction to the suggestion of potentially having a strategic focus on a niche? First draft, understood.
Sure, yeah. So now I can tell you my thoughts. So everything comes down to funding. I mean, that's everything. And I think those models that we've seen that are successful typically were done in a collaborative fashion. I can just use San Diego, who's probably, if you read anything about San Diego and their new mayor and its focus on the homeless, you'll see that the collaboration is huge between the city, the housing authority, and other entities. Because of housing, the homeless problem is such a large thing. Similar to the same in Los Angeles and Orange County. So I would say that the efforts would, I feel like the efforts to be successful would require some serious collaboration with municipality of whatever entity that we chose to collaborate with, the county, city, whomever, as relates to the ability to develop a sustainable model. Rather than, sort of just a piecemeal effort to really not to see the sort of results that we ideally want to see. So I think it always comes down to funding, what the source of funding is. And I mean, that's probably very obvious, in saying that, so it's probably nothing I need to say, but I think that that's the case. I think as an organization, you're right, we've been opportunists, we've utilized a program that has required very little on our part in terms of creativity, because folks have come to us and said, we need a tax exemption. We said, we can give you a tax exemption, and what are you gonna give us? And so for what it's worth, the idea of being able to do that will require some ability to have resources to leverage, but understand that obviously there needs to be a partnership and some buy-in from individuals who have the ability to do such. So I think the idea is a noble one. It's just not, it's not easy to entertain. I think some combination thereof, potentially, if you decided maybe to dispose of your assets, because you wanted to do some hybrid of both, potentially could be if if that really is something we want to hone in on. But I would certainly say that we would really need to be very focused about who it is we're going to serve, and not take on more than we probably could handle as relates to who you really specifically want to serve. So I think it could be a combination of the two, if there was serious interest in doing that, and getting things going.
Okay, and so as we transition to the next item, I will say, I think that's a very important thing for us to consider. A little bit on the timeline. The commissioners court, our appointers, are interested in speaking to us. We have been trying to aim for August, and some of you that have Google poll and hopefully responded, to give us time to come to them and I think say exactly this. Here are the options we're thinking about. We might have a niche or two, and we will be clear. If you want us to do this, here are the arguments, but here is the policy and funding support. If not, then as problem solvers, we will probably do something else. The commissioners court, I think it's hard to predict. They might be very prescriptive, or they might want to keep having us, problem solve by ourselves and make good decisions. We will find out. But I think we want to be able to enter that conversation and say, here are some areas of direction. In the meantime, and this is important, as we make this decision, it does not mean we're a closer business. It means we keep operating under the model that we have always operated, which is opportunistic, tax credit, and bonds, deal maker. That might be the model that lives us all. It might be the best thing that we can do, given the powers that we have for the people of the county. So I know that the staff, the broader community understands we're supposed to be doing that. And we have a conversation on surely stuff with that. And I hope that is understood by all of us. With that said, yes.
I just want to add that in terms of moving our assets or developing our properties or listed there, it would be so important to have a cost. Identify that. I read your memo for I think our president already alluded to this, some finite numbers or some kind of estimates would be really helpful in knowing whether that process is within reach.
Because of the cost, like $700,000 attorney
Yes.
to move it,
Yeah.
what are we gonna get? Right, attorneys.
That's why I didn't speak to that option, because I don't see it on the table till we know.
Yeah, I don't want to prolong too much discussion, but the memo in terms of the transaction costs really trigger that. That said, if there's passion around going to the county with a niche, then maybe we don't start with the county, we're gonna dissolve the anything, we're gonna make it work. But I had the same reaction, which is, well, we're talking about $1 million to protect the cost or 50K. Because one, we could live with. Okay, all right, $500,000.
It would be a guesstimate because each building is different, the documents are all different, they were, we did the review over a number of years and those terms seem to change based on experiences and so forth, so, each one's a little bit different, but we could use city, it's essentially what we did recently for city park, where we could use that as a model and say, this type of transaction, this is what it was in order to receive. Now, that was a sale. That would obviously be probably a different analysis if you're talking about this donating. I know that we will talk about possibly donating them to like organizations or whatever, if they were part to sell them. So there would probably be some differences there, but we can come up with a guess.
Can you tell us what the costs were associated with the city view of the part of the sale? Do you have a rough number do you recall?
Chris worked on that. That's all.
Associated with what?
So we had a property, it's just south of downtown that we sold to the city of Austin's Housing Finance Corporation. It's called City View at the Park. They wanted to do some, they had some additional land. They wanted to do some permanent supportive housing on the site as well. We sold that property to the city, our ownership interest in the property for about 2.6 million. And that happened December, I think it's finalized, the deal was. So we received $2.6 million for that. And I was asking if we knew, had a general idea of what that cost.
And that's structure was super all the other deals, so we were in general partner.
That's correct.
We only land. So it would be a sort of a land.
It would be good to get that number, and I think what I'm getting a sense of is, let's prepare some additional niche direction, as well as a better sense of what would it take to do the mission-oriented transfer / sale to achieve our dissolution goal. I think we have a sense of what the status situation is. We just keep doing what we're doing to help SHFC, but request the boards get remerged so that it's the same 5 people talking about the same thing. Barring any further comments or questions, we will go to item B, Executive Vice President Evaluation Report.
The form itself is the place to session.
Yes, I wanted to give you the floor,
Sure.
and if you could pull up the form and tell us a little bit about.
Okay, on the message board, Keisha and I have put our work product in its first draft form, and I wanted to just emphasize that it's not even close to complete yet. We had previously presented to this body that we were reviewing the HUD manual on how to perform an evaluation for CEO. We were also reviewing last year's evaluation form that was provided to us by the Patsy Chair, Round. And we were looking at strategic planning for this body, as well as the job description for Mr. Howard. So all the language in the proposed form is pulled from one of those places. No new key performance indicators. We did try to streamline the form to 4 essential categories, and for that we relied on the HUD manual for directors evaluating CEOs. That's the 4 that they use. The other thing, I don't know if it's on here, is that we wanted the rating system to be kind of like most rating systems areas, where the higher the rating is in a reflection of exceptional performance, and the lower the rating is where there's a need for additional development. And it doesn't meet expectations. So last year's evaluation was the opposite. And so there's in statistics of saying that, somebody's going to read something quickly and can make a mistake, let's fix it. So since everybody else uses, most people that we research uses the higher the number, the higher the performance rating. That's what we're proposing that we need to. And there's some additional particular definition from federal employee reviews and city Boston employee evaluation form. So those the definitions of each of those ratings from on the back. That being said, there's some things that are just like, need to be like updated in terms of, some abbreviations used that need to be substituted for our board as strategic as opposed to HATSA board, so we're gonna fix anything that says Board of Commissioners to the SHFC board. And I've spoken with Mr. Howard about maintenance condition ratings that we can review during this first and second quarter, and whether CMAP, REAC, or more scores are still relevant given the properties under SHFC. And I'll leave that to you, Patrick, to summarize our conversation on what ratings we should look at.
Well, I mean, I think our conversation was probably more clarification. I mean, I think the realities of it is, I mean, you're talking about external entities having a standard for performance, which differ between the housing authority and strategic in terms of its construct. So I do believe it's going to be challenging to try to merge the two, quite frankly, based on the nature of the business. I mean, I think the commonality is the interlocal agreement, obviously, and the fact that you both believe that affordable housing is a priority, and that's your mission inherently just globally.
Properties on HFC, limit our purview to those ratings, which ratings could we access?
Not sure right now.
Yeah.
But I do believe, so that's why I mean, I not,
Being no performance reviews by PPHC.
if you ask me about the model itself, I think, I mean, it probably lends itself to a little bit more like more of a framework, but I think as it relates to the external factors, I do believe that we probably, I think it falls short in the essence of some of the things that you do expect from me that probably doesn't lend itself to what I see in terms of responsibility, in terms of policy development and like, or at least the creating the framework. And I think we're going specifically to, I'm gonna say it this way. I think we have the strategic, the operational, and the tactic. And I think this is heavy on the tactics and less on the strategic. And I think that in order, and not because of the name of the organization, because of the responsibility. So I think that there needs to be a way to try to figure out how you connect those so that it makes sense for someone like myself.
So just to clarify again, this particular section is lifted from an evaluation last year. And I understand the section 8, the CMAX scores are not going to be relevant.
Correct.
So let's cross that out. And more similarly.
It's a specific HUD related
Right.
to
So
PBR.
in the conversation, and I talked about how a review of code violations on properties that we wholly own, such as Rosemont, would be relevant, and also the TDHC annual performance report would be relevant. And you receive those, I believe, annually on
We received those on the housing authority properties, yes,
the housing.
that's correct. So TDHCA does do a review of tax credits, but
Right.
I guess what I'm saying is the conversation is more of a clarification. I wasn't really weighing in on the merits of the evaluation because that's what I was asked. So what I'm saying is I do believe, what I'm saying is that to appropriately probably address what I believe is all of what you should measure, we need to talk more about some of the more strategic requirements, in addition to how those are nested within the framework of something that becomes more tactical, because there are things inherently that we're talking about, which would be something that would be outsourced. So you're responsible for ensuring that someone is doing X, Y, and Z versus you're responsible for the school, right? So you see what I'm saying? So I think what I'm saying is there's much more to the job than what we're talking about here in terms of that, because it doesn't lend itself to someone at a strategic level. It's more tactical and operational. but yes, we talked about code violations in terms of what, in the 5 months, in terms of what the focus has been. What has it centered around, which obviously I think is probably more of a anomaly, but in the relative to the entire portfolio, what I'm saying is it becomes, it makes it to be more substantial than it is if you're looking at the entire portfolio in terms of what the responsibility is. And that's why I'm saying I think it probably, there was an attempt to simplify it, but I think in the essence of simplifying it, you may, in essence, leave out a lot of what essentially you would be expecting me to do as opposed to those just specific things, which is, I feel like not substantial in terms of all of what you expect me to do. If that's all I mean, because you don't want me, if the only thing we were concerned about was code violations going forward between June and December, there would be nothing because there aren't any violations related to what is what the responsibility is going forward. So in December, you're talking about something that only resonates within one of the 28 developments as it relates to the project, and it's almost a fourth of what you're looking at in terms of the weights relative to all of what you're expecting to do. So that's what I'm saying. So I think with it, I don't know if this is a forum to have this conversation, but what I'm saying is that there's probably more, I would probably suggest that you look at it maybe a little more in a more global context. I guess.
Just to be clear, I understand that how we weight the different measures is relevant, but just what they are is also helpful. So even if it's weighted in a different way in your mind, the code violations only apply to a property that is done for 5 minutes out of the 12 minutes. But having that documentation on the code violations is good. And I know it's I just haven't.
Yes, we're working on it.
In terms of the timeline for our use of the form, and this is particularly useful context for our new members. So last winter, and this is the first time I did this. So Mr. Robert, please have had additional experience with the relevant answer. Last winter, sometime near the end of the year, because the employment agreement is between Patsy and Mr. Howard, and we are interjected into the interlocal, Patsy was being kind enough to solicit our feedback and incorporated it in accordance with their, in some of your cases, your process. And so at the start of this year, what we thought we wanted to do, since the form is very Patsy focused, was come up with our own vision of what the EVP's performance should be. The temple is set by Patsy that it's once a year at the end, and they really have the power in this situation, as it should be, and we reimburse them for staff capacity. We want to use the form to participate in the happy process as some of you allow us, and also to just have a rigorous culture of performance improvement. So the context is not that we have the power to impact employment compensation, et cetera, directly. We participate in the process in accordance with how those that actually have the power let us. It is a tricky situation that some of you happen to be those people. I am not. And so for me, this is and for a few of us, this is a way of saying, how do we value performance just on the SHFC line? That's the context. In terms of the timeline, it would be great if we could adopt a form as a body. There has been a lot of work done to create this. We need to have two pieces of feedback. One is that it's traditionally best practice to have a person being evaluated give their feedback in a formal way before there is adoption, so that there is an agreement and understanding, sense of procedural fairness. The stakes here are again kind of subtle and complicated because it is not the actual evaluation. It is our anticipation of being included in the process of the actual evaluation. And second, we're evaluating a body that's going through potentially three very interesting phases: a Rosemont phase, a transition phase, and whatever happens after transition. And so it is a tricky situation where the indicators and how performance is measured might change significantly in reality, in the lived experience, even though all of those pieces fall under the job description. And so you can see in this very fruitful exchange, those of you that are learning, some of the difficulties in kind of adjusting to having an annual evaluation and potentially different phases of activity. My hope is that all of us will engage in material and this when we'll put a timeline for when formal feedback will be gotten from the person being evaluated, the EVP, and when you would like us to focus on adoption. And set that deadline for us so that we do it. And give enough time for the person being evaluated to align their performance with whatever potential changes there might be, although I expect that it will be significantly different from the PATSI precedent. It will just be a little bit more granular in terms of what. So the takeaway from this discussion is get formal feedback. Give us a deadline, the committee on when you want to act. It's up to us to provide feedback if we have it on the message board ASAP. Anything that's out on the second? Yes.
The idea that these four categories are all weighted equally as far as. And then also perhaps a good category for strategic planning that may get added.
Well, I think, given our time, where we are in history, because of Rosemont, some of the sections on resident management and housing management are going to be less weighted because of the number of months that we use. But only for 5 months out of the 12 months will there have been a Rosemont for those categories. Now, on the other hand, there is some implied, given our mission of strategic to provide safe, secure, and affordable housing to the residents of our community, there is some continued obligation for the resident experience, but it's a little different. If we owe 0.01%, then it is totally different.
It does, makes a lot of sense. So do you anticipate putting percentage value for the overall valuation, like that housing management will be 40% of the final evaluation, or
Some factor, yeah.
like you said, resident management
I think if you could,
could be
put
less.
some of that out in the message board, will definitely apply to you and teaching them. Good talk.
And did I understand correctly that how you would like a new section, you would like an additional section about strategic planning?
Well, it's not so much, well, strategic planning is a part of my responsibility. What I'm suggesting is that in terms of, so say for instance, this organization was much larger, 2,000 people. You would be expecting me to work at a strategic level because you have layers of responsibility that are pushed down to individuals. So the overall health of the organization may be one thing, but there are specific things that you're expecting me to do. You're expecting me to put a framework in place so that those things can be achieved. But you're not expecting me to actually deliver the service necessarily, but you want to ensure that those things are happening. And what I'm saying is that the way things are maybe worded or in terms of the indicators or measures themselves, it should be speaking to the policy framework or the expectation at the strategic level and not the direct service delivery of the service itself. Because I'm not going out having an after school program. I'm not, and that's not an expectation for me to do that. You may say you need to ensure that you have adequate, resources to do such, or that you secured a contract that meet the expectations related to those services themselves, as opposed to how many kids got backpacks because they're in, it's in, and so what I'm saying is the measure for me is not at a strategic level, it's more of a tactical level, or where it could even be operational in some sense because obviously the organization is small. So there is the overlap, but the nesting comes at me being, you expecting me to perform at a certain level and having the general oversight as opposed to delivery of the actual services themselves.
So, is it okay to me if the distinction without a difference, but I would be really interested, are you gonna redline? That's what
I could, I mean, I certainly, I mean, I heard about it 2 days ago, so I mean, I did not. Yeah, and I was, so
So you don't get alerted on the message board?
it doesn't alert you that way, I mean, someone had mentioned.
I think
You
you
gotta,
put setting.
you gotta check the
It's a
random
setting.
block.
Oh, okay, maybe I.
But I mean.
Well, I mean, okay, but I wasn't, okay, so I'm gonna just say this, I didn't. Someone had mentioned that there was something up, but no, I didn't. Not thinking that I need to go and check the message board because my evaluation is going on, so I can redline it. Was not something that I was clearly focused on, so I did not. Sure, yeah, I mean, I have all kinds of thoughts, yes.
What's that?
I have several thoughts, so.
It's 3 weeks now.
Sure.
Are any further discussion with item? We are past our 90 minutes, although we did start late. And some of you are at fault for that, so I don't want to hear it. But I do want to kind of expedite because we want to get to our 6-month feedback session, mutual feedback session. On committee reports, if there is there any committee that must make a report at this moment right now that they cannot make yet? No. Then I will move to executive vice president reports. And I will look collectively at items A, B, and C. You receive documentation in this. Is there anything exceptional that any of you wish to report? Any executive vice president reports?
I think the only thing I want to mention is, as we talked about, what the balance sheet is. There are some outstanding balances that we're reconciling, specifically related to Rosemont, that obviously will reflect differently. So once those are achieved, which will probably be mid-month, if I'm speaking correctly, we'll probably be able to send you an update as to what the balance sheet looks like as you're sort of brainstorming what you might look at as a framework for this. What we're calling it.
The investment program.
Sure, yeah. So to know what's actually there, I mean, in terms of.
To the dollar, yes.
That's correct. So we will make sure that happens.
All right. Since there are no exceptional items that need to be reported at this time, I read your reports with great glee and I appreciate that you send them. I will move to number 7, which is new and unfinished business. I know that we want to talk about Cambridge Villas and get that information. If we do not get if you get email, we'll talk about it in our meeting. There was a request for a investigation into our performance at Rosemont. And so if there are members that are interested in taking the lead in engaging that item, I would appreciate knowing about it, whether through the message board or through email. Are there any other new or unfinished business items that you want to propose for our next meeting? This is the time to help set the agenda for the next meeting. Okay. You can always submit one via message board or email. If it is timely, we will try our best to put it on. With that said, we're going to move to executive session. We're going to have a consultation on personnel matters. That means that folks, they get out of the room. And I have to read this. I read the notice that I have to go into.
No,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
Ms. Whiting, before you leave, would you help us go into executive session?
I said.
Okay, all those in favor of going to executive session, we're expecting a personal matter, say aye. Aye.